Do you remember? Because I remember. Evenings that turned into nights, basking in the comforting glow of an old CRT television or monitor, watching a graphical world of imagination and adventure unfold before our eyes that had never been witnessed prior to that moment. I remember a world of unwritten possibilities that signified a bright future to come, of a time where everything tasted sweeter with that added vibrancy of youth. The seemingly endless, hazy summer days of dim recollection, where dusk would descend and the pixel prevarication would ensorcel our senses, transporting us in tandem with our creative minds into a singular moment of invention, never to be recaptured. I recall my brothers and friends as both allies and foes, whether huddled about a shared keyboard or sitting opposite with their monitor tilted out of the sight line of my prying eyes. My incredulity as I clutched the big box to my chest on the way home, pondering to myself how this company could possibly top their previous masterwork, poring over detailed manuals as the installer waged war against my aged peripherals. I remember the internet, and taking a case of floppy disks into a university, surfing through pages built by individuals rather than giant companies, downloading extra maps and mods and text files with hints and cheats, handcrafted by a small group of people who cared just as much as I did. There seemed no limit, no possibility that could not be unearthed by these collective geniuses that adorned the gaming companies, surrounded by pizza and a carbonated beverage, and hours of trial and error, and a desire to make something that was both memorable and fun. I remember leafing through the covers of magazines written by enthusiasts instead of journalists, and gazing in wonder at the titles to come, of sharing their collective excitement as this niche hobby we were all a part of continued to grow. I was there when the computers started to speak to us as standard, when CD-ROMs and multimedia ushered in a previously impossible reality, and the music and sound casted a symphonic spell over our senses through little grey speakers and left us agape. Then the internet came home to us, and for a short time each day I could acquire a bevy of information and modification directly onto my hard drive. I was there when the fully 3D environments graced us, when extra parts fitted slots and bestowed a brand new dimension for us to jump or fly through at impossible speeds. Then I remember playing with my brothers when my brothers were not there at all. It wasn't quite the same. I remember when the internet changed, when it became ubiquitous and ever-present, when the small individual sites were engulfed or bought outright, or simply shunted down the search results by optimized SEO from marketing officials. I watched as my hobby grew, as more people embraced it, as more companies involved themselves, not for the benefit of the users, but for their bottom line. I saw the marketing budgets explode, how the cream didn't rise to the top, how we were tricked and lost faith, as the very systems and people we sought to avoid in our collective solitude proceeded to infringe upon us. I watched the takeovers, the end of genres, the codification of gameplay, and the increasing desire to produce a cinematic experience at the expense of player agency. I watched the culture retreat and eventually vanish, fragmented and scattered to the winds, constantly hounded from place to place by the ever-increasing bull rush of those who didn't share their ideals. By the time the mobile revolution and the subsequent reshaping of society was underway, my world was already gone, with its remnants so hidden from sight and insular that I could never hope to reconnect. So I stopped playing entirely. I no longer recognized my oldest hobby, and it was cast to the wayside like so many other childhood activities. I came back to my hobby in time, otherwise this channel wouldn't have existed. But there's no greater indictment of the way the industry has headed over the past few decades than losing me as a customer altogether. I enjoyed some of the games upon my return, and was determined to make up for lost time, but ultimately I found that something had been lost in the transition to an industry worth billions. People told me it was nostalgia, but if that were the case, I'd have eventually stuck exclusively to titles from the past. I didn't. A decade later, and people are telling me it's age. But if that were true, then why did I feel the same way 10 years prior, when I was the target audience? No, The baseline of playability and technological quality of life was higher with these new titles, but there was less of them that impressed me. So as an experiment, I did go back, and I discovered a world of emulation and preservation that I never knew existed. I started playing games for which I had no nostalgia, and I enjoyed them more than the games coming out now. But it wasn't just the obvious games either. My deeper dives into the gaming landscape of the past have unearthed quality titles that I didn't even know existed. And that brings me to today, when I can play hundreds of fantastic games from my favourite era of gaming and pick a handful of others from the modern morass that intrigue me. Thanks for listening. Now, back to Big Klondike.